Retired Fire Chief Dan Paulsen has been working hard with the Rail Working Group and coming up with some interesting concepts for the city of Saskatoon. A number of partners around the table. I've invited Dan to come back and give us a little bit of insight into some of the things you're working on. A lot of experience when you left, and I'm glad to see it being retained by the city.
Well, thank you, Randy.
And if you could maybe give us some insight into what we're doing with regards to rail safety and the railways that we're working with through the city of Saskatoon.
The biggest thing, well, first off, thanks for
Yeah.
letting me be here. I was very fortunate to have a career that allowed me to get into a number of different areas, and one was dealing with the railways and the national government on just rail, what it does, how it moves across the country, and just trying to see if we can get a safer community. That's kind of where it started. I was then able to continue working after retirement with the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs in the Emergency Response Task Force in Ottawa. And what we're looking at is really the big question that comes up is highly flammable liquids in tank car. And obviously, we really don't put rail and rail issues to the forefront until there's an accident or an incident. Because, I mean, rail has got an incredible safety record. As every one of the transportation industries, whether you're going to look at, aviation as well. But when things go wrong, they very much do hit the news. And so one of the endeavors that we continue to do within the city is we formed this rail working group. And the idea behind it, both CNCP sit on this committee, along with Srita and some of the key business people within the city. And we're transportation and Saskatoon planning. And what we're trying to look at is how do we have a city grow, stay vibrant, and try and reduce the number of rail delays that happens. And the proposals we're bringing forward end up being a number of overpasses or underpass concepts at about a half a dozen key locations within the city.
When we see the value of, let's see, we've done some math here as well in terms of the length of the trains and the different crossings. Will we see everything from hazardous goods more coordinated between the railways and the city fire department in the event of a mishap, that some of that list is shared?
Well, the thing is that there's always been information sharing.
Okay.
One of the outcomes of the Lac-Mégantic disaster was what's called PD, or Protective Directorate number 32, which was, it was mandatory for all the Class 1 railways to share their manifests with the emergency planners of the cities. So on an annual basis, every emergency planner will get a list of all of the loads and the types of loads that go through the city, so that at least they have an idea that they can start planning. Another directorate that came out was actually coordinating or limiting the speed of key trains as they go through the city. So when you start to think about, they're looking at the safety of the citizens, they're really trying to look out for what is potentially down the way and allow the emergency responders to do their job. The Emergency Response Task Force that we sit with recognizes, 80% of your country's volunteer fire departments, and they don't get the support that your major municipalities do.
Yeah.
And this is one of the key things that we were trying to look at. How do we build a training program so that the first responders in many of your small communities, Lac-Mégantic's a perfect example. You think about what they handled and what they were faced with, it was very overwhelming.
Calgary, I think, had 14 cars go off the rails here in downtown January, February of this year. Does it matter with regards to whether the trains are carrying grain or gravel or ammonia in terms of the speed, or is that mandated by the federal government or the railways themselves?
What they'll have is, anything that's considered a key train will be limited in speed, and a key train will have more than 20 cars carrying hazardous materials, or one car of poisonous materials will end up being considered a key train. They will have limitations on the speed as they go through municipalities. But the biggest thing when you talk to train individuals, the key areas are crossings and coupling. So every time you hook up or decouple a train, that's when you end up with possibilities of issues. So you've got over 20,000 level crossings in Canada. It's very difficult to try and stay on top of all of those. So
We have a number of crossings in the city, and I guess would measure them with the number of vehicles per day. How many cars per day or trains would go through on CP or CN's lines through the city?
Well, I'll back up your question just a little bit on what we used to prioritize what we felt happening within the city was number one, safety, which means what are the primary access routes for emergency responders. So we gave that a rating of 5 and then attributed that to all of the crossings that we have within the city and then started to build it out from there. So number one was going to be emergency responders. Number two was our bus rapid transit or our transportation systems that go through the city and including that of vehicle traffic. And then finally what was going to be the advantage, disadvantage to the rail systems to build this what we see as priorities. And that narrowed it down to really 6 crossings within the city that we felt were key to being able to continue moving individuals through Saskatoon to a population of the 500,000 or eventually 2 million, but 500,000 is the first target.
Is there, from your work as chief, is there any issues that you can foresee with that growth? Would the underpasses take care of that so that we're not, I guess, coordinating when the trains are going through the city, the fire truck or the ambulance, sitting waiting to get to St. Paul's on 20th would have to go to 22nd and go under or over? Some coordination between the trains and emergency services?
That is right now the intent of the underpasses is that you will still have the ability to flow traffic along with ability to still access businesses. I mean, those are 2 key points that we've had to put into the discussion, that you wouldn't just rip out the heart of the area and put it over an underpass. You'd have to take those points into consideration. And we believe the Transportation of Saskatoon has come up with some unique proposals on what we see, and it's worked elsewhere on how do we have continued flow through traffic, still allow emergency responders to get through, the trains to go through, and then obviously have access to the businesses in the area.
How long are the average train lengths? And at any one point, we see some data in terms of the speed being governed and the number of cars. Or it's not fair to say the number of cars because some cars are longer and shorter than the others. What would be an average wait time, and can we expect as the trains get larger?
I mean, it's denoted that a key train can't go through municipalities, I believe, at 40 miles an hour is the max speed, but even they have themselves governed their speeds to a slower speed, again, from a safety perspective. I use the figure of about 14,000 feet because that's discussions of what is potentially going to be coming out with what they call a distributed power style loading, where you're going to have engines distributed across the entire length of the train, and you can coordinate that up to 14,000 feet, close to 2 miles,
Right.
Or over 2 miles. And so when you start looking at that, you've got some fairly extensive waits, 6, 10, 12 minutes, depending upon the speed at which they go. Are they just leaving the yard and building speed? So it's really difficult to say exactly what that's going to be. But understand that they are under federal mandate of how long they can sit on a crossways. But once they're moving forward, that's what they're doing. They have full right of way to go across that and continue going as long as they're going in a singular direction.
Have there been any notable mishaps in Saskatoon in memory? I can't recall anything where there's been a mass evacuation like we've seen in Lac-Mégantic or like that.
The interesting thing, in my career, the only times that we had anything of dangerous commodity from rail was actually within the yards. Out on the general road structure, it was really transportation. It was trucks that caused us the greatest number of hazardous material releases. And I mean, an interesting stat, I've always looked at it, that rail carries 70% of Canada's commodities. So I mean, we built around them. They're not the bad guy in this situation. And yet 70% of the dangerous goods of Canada are hauled by truck on the road. So when you start looking at, if you do have a mishap with rail, the quantities are typically rather large though.
What do you see happening on a go-forward basis? None of this is going to happen overnight. If we're looking at underpasses and overpasses in the city, obviously federal dollars, there's going to be some coordinated effort between the railways and Saskatoon. Any timeline that we can expect some things to happen?
We would like to be able to develop it to a shovel-ready project and go after the New Build Canada Fund. They have just, released the new budgets as of this last week, so I mean now that's where that's going to be start to looked at. One of the questions that has been laid before this committee is what would it cost to actually pick up and move both rail yards out of the city, and what would that look like as far as a total dollar cost? And I mean, and once we started realizing the fact that based on federal statute, if as a municipality we request that, then the municipality is responsible for all costs incurred in moving it, all costs incurred as far as business interruption and making the rails whole. So we realize that is really outside the capability of this small working group, and so the proposal has gone back to council asking for a support to be able to look at expertise, because I mean it is a very large picture.
So the days of, I guess we can still have coffee talk kind of conversations in the McDonald's and Tim Hortons of the world, but this will hone in on hard numbers and give us some direction as to where we should go there.
Exactly, because right now they anticipate about $500,000, $500 million in total for these underpasses is what the early projections, and how is that in relationship to actually moving the rails out? But I've used the analogy that a rail line through a city, which we built around, is like a spinal cord. That you pull it out, you will have multiple businesses that will be impacted by that, because their commodities are moved in and out of the city by rail.
So this isn't done by a long shot. I want to thank you for the work that you've done so far, and I wish you the best of luck in bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Good. We'll be right back.